Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new video. As you can tell, we are in a different locale. I have since moved to the other side of the country, but that doesn't mean that I am stopping to make content. So, just like my previous video, I'm going to be reacting to some Jubilee content. They have decided to bring out a new version of Middle Ground, where they have, like, the liberals or conservatives or like the two opposing sides, but this time they have an undecided lot of people. I will post the full video down below in the description, as once again they like to make videos that are over an hour long, so if you want to watch that, go for it, go listen to the debate. They do some really interesting stuff. There's only one prompt that I was really interested in reacting to today, about whether schools should include trans conversations in sex ed. A lot of the conservatives, as far as I've found, they tend to argue that when we're talking about including trans people in the conversations of sex ed, they want, like, 10-year-olds to be learning about the nitty-gritty of surgeries. Now, obviously that shouldn't be the case. I strongly believe in age-appropriate sex ed. Let's see what they've got, and let's see how this debate goes.
Schools should include trans conversation in sex ed.
An age-appropriate time, I agree.
That was an easy one. I mean, age-appropriate, absolutely. I'm glad straight out the gate someone agrees. So let's see where this can go.
Agree, yes.
What is that age appropriate?
I think by grades 3 or 4, they understand.
Oh, that's
So,
early.
Like around 8, 9, or?
I don't know anymore. My kids are too old, but that sounds about right. I think 8 or 9 years old is a good time, because gender is a concept that is formed in the mind of a child around the ages of 2, 3, or 4 years old. By the time they're 7 or 8, they understand the permanency of gender. So I think that's a good time to introduce it.
Now, should they be talked about as just as much as, let's say, heterosexual sex, or more in?
Absolutely, I think it should be a complete, on my opinion personally, trans and queer, like, sex ed should be taught to kids as much or as frequently as heterosexual sex ed is.
In terms of including different historical relevancy, anything like that?
I think it would be great to introduce the difference between gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation, because that is 3 completely different realms.
You can tell that the conservatives aren't necessarily happy with this one. I think it's a very important thing that establishing the difference between gender identity, gender expression, and sexuality is really important. And again, you don't have to go into the entire, like, gender spectrum. You don't have to go into every single sexuality that exists. It's just sort of working up in small increments so that potentially children have a better understanding when they're older, when they meet someone that may not be like them, someone that is either trans or is either queer in some way. So for those of you that don't know the difference, gender identity is all, like, psychological. It's how you feel in your mind. It's who you in yourself believe you are, and it's got nothing to do with your sex or your chromosomes. Gender, a lot of the time people will argue as like gender identity, a lot of the time people will argue as a social construct, especially because there's a whole variety of them. Gender expression, on the other hand, is how you present yourself outwardly to other people. So, for example, I present myself very, very masculine, because that's how I'd rather be perceived as a non-binary person, but as a trans-masc non-binary person that's had top surgery, I'd rather be perceived as a man than as a woman. So I dress in that way so that, not that stereotypes should be a thing, and I disagree that people should have to look a certain way in order to be that way, in order to be perceived that way, but so that people can look at me and go, oh, okay, they sit more on this side of, like, the gender spectrum and everything. So, yeah, expression is about how you present yourself outwardly to others. Gender identity is an inward mental sort of feeling, not necessarily a feeling, but mental, like, identity.
And children can understand the difference between gender expression and gender identity at that age without ever having to talk about sex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely
I agree with her 100%. Like, you know, how many little kids want to dress up, and mums and dads and parents put their girls in pink and their boys in blue, and only boys can like firefighters and Nerf guns and playing with monster trucks and dinosaurs, and only girls can play with Barbies. But that like line has completely blurred, like little boys wanting to be in dresses and how, you know, they just want to express themselves in different ways. And I think everyone should be allowed to do that in a fluid manner, and we shouldn't have such like binary ideas of how people should be. Not that I necessarily agree with like genderless parenting and genderless upbringing, just because I feel like that could add too much confusion, and potentially kids could maybe resent their parents in the future. I think kids do have a somewhat of an early grasp and early concept in the difference of gender expression and gender identity.
I think especially what they're proposing right now, a lot of the mainstream sort of education on sex ed is pretty like vulgar. Look at a couple like books. You see a lot of parents going out to like city committee meetings.
Here we go.
And they're reading books in front of like the school committee, and the school has to like stop the entire thing because they're reading such vulgar stuff.
If I had to push back on that though, kind of we've been going through like different personal experiences, and some of these cases we might just be hearing about because they're the most extremist of cases.
Yes,
do you think
thank
that's
you.
what's going on, or do you think it's more of a common, prevalent instance that's happening around the country?
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a differentiation between personal experiences and just what's going on in general. And so, of course, you're going to see like the more popular cases on social media and stuff.
Of course, because
what it really
bad
boils down
news
to, the
sells
question
well.
isn't really so much what's the content, but is it true? And it's not true. And so why should kids be learning about it?
I mean, personally, I think that sex education should be simple biology, and then anything above that should be an opt-in system.
Sex ed and biology lessons are different. You can teach biology in biology and in the science classes. Teach sex ed in sex ed classes. There's a difference between them. But yeah, this whole idea of things being read that are pretty vulgar, I bet you someone's got a copy of a book that has some, like, one raunchy scene between two gay men or two queer men and has started to read that, like, one specific passage. Yeah, it'd be like bringing 50 Shades of Grey to, like, a sixth formers meeting. For those that are not in the UK, sixth formers are, like, between the ages of 16 and 18, right? It's just, it's not really done. I feel like people are bringing the most extremist of cases, but personally, I haven't done a lot of research into this and I might not be well informed. So if anyone wants to let me know about these sorts of cases so I can read up on it, please do comment below and let me know.
Where parents have to opt their children into that learning. I really don't think it's the responsibility of teachers to be talking to children about that. I think it really boils down to it is a parental's rights issue.
It should be parents and
make the ultimate
teachers,
decision
if I'm
how their
honest.
children learn that.
I disagree only because, like, where I'm from North Carolina, and there was a point where sex ed wasn't being taught. And then there
Sex
was a
ed
point
should
where it
always be
was.
taught.
And when they started teaching sex ed, there were children that were coming forward about, like, being touched inappropriate and things like that because they didn't know that those things were inappropriate parts because they hadn't been taught otherwise. So not teaching children about their bodies, about their sex, about their gender, about their expression, you're limiting them. You're giving people, pedophiles specifically, the opportunity to prey on them because they don't know any better. You're leaving them in the dark. As far as like gender is concerned, like being trans, had I learned about what trans was at an early age, I think I would have had a much happier life in general. Yeah. By 21,
Very
I
interesting
was
to
going
hear
into
that.
transitioning and everything like that. But I felt and knew that there was something specifically different by the age of like 6, 7, without even knowing what trans was.
For people that have never experienced gender dysphoria, I don't ever wish for someone to experience it because it's not fun and it's very difficult to like deal with. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, if I'm honest. And it's very interesting that this person is saying that he recognizes that gender identity was at the age of 6 or 7. You know, when you're trans, when you're non-binary, less so with non-binary, but a lot of the time, people know at a younger age, and it's going to happen more with my generation and below because we have access to this sort of media and we have access to all of this sort of information, whereas generations above mine and people that are older than me may not be able to experience that, and they may come out at a later date because, you know, they didn't know what these terms were, or they've sort of been so embedded in the concept of a binary system and not really been able to express themselves in a gender way, in another way for their gender, or being able to process what their gender identity is. Very interesting to see what this person's talking about.
And had I been taught that, transitioning later on in life would have been completely different.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it was the very first prompt we had. I think almost every transsexual I know had that early experience, right? That's happy in their transition.
I just want to point out, based on last video that we did, which if you haven't watched it, it will be linked somewhere and everywhere for you to go and check it out. Sarah, or Sarah, I'm not too sure the pronunciation of her name, she's very much in the camp of transsexual rather than transgender. Now, the debates I've been having over in my comment section on the other video is the difference between transgender and transsexual. Now, in my understanding of it, this is my personal understanding, not everyone's going to agree, so just hear me out. To me, transsexual is someone that identifies as the opposite sex and goes to transition to the binary opposite sex. Most transsexual people, as far as my understanding goes, consider themselves binary trans people. Now, the transgender is someone that is transitioning, whether it be a social transition or a medical transition. Social transition meaning change of name or pronouns, and a medical transition meaning, of course, any sort of HRT, any sort of top surgery or breast augmentation or bottom surgeries. That is someone transitioning from their assigned gender at birth to something that they weren't assigned to. So, for example, I would count as transgender because I have had top surgery, but I identify as non-binary. With the whole umbrella thing, again, this was a big sort of argument in my other video, but it's fascinating to see the differences between the two. And I have more of an understanding based on talking to a whole lot of people about it, so yeah, I just want to clear that up for what's going to happen. She's very much going to talk about trans as in transsexual rather than trans as in transgender.
I agree in that. I really think it is the it's parents' responsibility.
The schools are supposed to pick up where the parents fall off. That's
Yes.
the whole point of sending your children to school.
Absolutely.
No, your parents have the right to make the decision for you.
Okay.
I just want to interject right there, and that is a very U.S. way of thinking, is that parental rights trump everything else. Because there's a Convention of Children's Rights worldwide, and the U.S. is the only country who hasn't signed on to it.
Wow,
So
I didn't know
children
that, actually.
in other countries have rights before their parents do. And I think that it should be taught in schools to protect the child, not just so that
That's
the
something
parent
really
gets to
interesting that I've
make all
learned.
the rules.
Okay, let's go to the other side of group. Which side do you guys resonate with more, liberals or conservatives?
This would be interesting to see how the undecided
I
section
think
of
we
this
have all
works.
undecided here. Let's start with you, because this is interesting because you've always been on the liberal side until now. What spoke to you that made you undecided in this instance?
Well, I would just like to mention that I actually work in childcare and I work with children. And so, as much as I think that we should have comprehensive sex education, I think that 5 years old is a bit young.
I agree.
I think maybe middle school age, like 10 to high school. I don't think that parents should have completely all the say, because if that parent is more on one side or the other, then they are going to push their child to do what they want them to do, and that child should be able to make that decision for themselves once they are at that age.
That sums it up perfectly for how I believe things should be. I think, like, 10 years old seems like a good place to start for sex ed, for all sex ed to be inclusive. And again, age appropriate. We're not going to teach them about the ins and outs of gay sex and all of those sorts of things. It should be age appropriate. It should just be acknowledging that some people have two mums, some people have two dads, some people have two parents, whatever. It should be that slow, like, build up of sex ed, so that people and kids can be aware of what the world is like truly.
Maybe both sides actually do accept, the fact that trans individuals exist. However, more of the discrepancy is around the age and when it's being introduced. What do you think?
I think she mentioned around 8 or 9. I think that's a good age. I have a little brother who's 11, and when he was around that age, he was able to understand that I was queer and that my cousin was trans, and he was able to understand that we were different.
I would say around 8 or 9 is probably fine in my opinion, because that's generally the age in which children have a solid grasp on their own identity.
Perfect.
And it's usually, about 10 years after that maybe that they on average will disclose that, but at that age is when kids will usually figure out that they're not cis, if that's the case.
This lady, she started with this concept of permanency. I just thought that was so profound. undergirding the point that I've been making from the outset, that sex, if you want to call it gender, there's a permanency about it that needs to be respected.
What?
And when you're teaching little kids about transgenderism, you're automatically injecting confusion. That feeds to the very contagion that we were talking about at the outset. It breeds this confusion into children. That's a real problem. I agree with the point that was made here.
Okay. I don't think it does breed confusion into kids. Like in the UK, if you wish to transition, you have to go through so many hoops and so many steps in order to do so. As far as I'm aware, the last time I checked, the NHS waiting time for your first GIC appointment is about 54 months, 56 months, which is approximately about 5 years. From there, you have to have multiple sessions with a gender identity clinic for them to then decide, yeah, you know, we can, depending on your age, put you on hormone blockers, which, might I add, are reversible and have been used since before trans people became mainstream, which is a whole nother argument in itself. Hormone blockers were originally used so that young girls who were going through puberty at a young age, or young boys that were going through puberty at a really young age, i.e. like 7, 5, whatever, it allowed them to experience their childhood without having to go through puberty, and they come off them when it's time. Being on HRT, as in any sort of hormone replacement therapy, that, however, will have some irreversible effects. So once you go onto hormone blockers or onto HRT, then you have to be on it for most likely a year. You have to be on some sort of hormone replacement therapy before you can then think of the steps of surgery. So that's a very long process in itself. That's at least 6 years worth of a process. So if I'm honest, I think the kids have time to figure out like how they're feeling, who they are. That's a whole long time. So this guy clearly is very much in the camp of sex and gender are the exact same thing. And I am, of course, as more on the liberal side, going to argue differently. But calling it a contagion, I think, is a bit of a strong word. So yeah, I'm feeling a little bit riled up about that. But I'm going to hear him out and see what else he has to say.
I don't think that sex should really be pushed onto kids at all. I mean, for hundreds of years, public education didn't teach sex ed, and things went pretty well. You didn't have all this confusion. And regarding the situation about pedophilia or otherwise, you don't need to teach children about transgenderism for them to know that somebody shouldn't be touching your private parts.
No one was arguing that. What is he on about? No one was arguing that sex ed, whether it's to do with trans people or the queer community, or whether it's completely about heterosexuals, like, sex ed should happen no matter what, right? Sometimes it does take sex ed for kids to realize that someone shouldn't be touching those private parts, because they might not know what it is, and especially if parents aren't teaching them that. I remember in my experience of sex ed, and most of my friends can agree with this, we've all had slightly different instances, but we knew nothing. We had no education about like queer sex ed. What I was given from my parents, I was given a book to read, and I think I may have had like a conversation about like the birds and the bees, like literally the birds and the bees, and that was about it. Like, I think there was one lesson about how to put a condom on. There was one lesson about like the T video. Now, if you don't know what the T video is, it's literally about consent, but it's old and outdated these days. So yeah, it's somewhat baffling to see this.
You know, I think, you know, my takeaway, I guess, you know, I would say I still kind of am unsure where I would stand specifically, like in terms of age ranges and, you know, content, but I think, you know, for me, I think there is kind of, for me, at the center of it is that conflict between, you know, parents that don't want specific things to be talked about, and then parents who just don't care at all. But at least knowing that the conversation's going on and maybe signing off on that. I know we've seen that in the past with, you know, like taking the slips home and being, you know, showing the parent if they, you know, like, we're gonna take the kids into classes today, we're gonna talk about this, you know, sign off if you want them to or not.
However, wouldn't that kind of introduce a bit of a slippery slope? What if that happens when it comes to discussions around history, around race? Do you think that could lead to parents kind of essentially shaping the worldview that may not be factually accurate?
I like, in theory, the idea of like sign-off slips about what kids learn about is a good idea, but I don't think it should just be for sex ed. At the end of the day, I think it should also be to do with religion, depending on how you teach religion, because sometimes they teach religion in a very sort of forced view of things, and it's like this is what we believe, you kind of have to believe it. So he's right when it comes to a slippery slope. One of the things we don't want to do, especially when it comes to signing off on things, is trying to eradicate queer people from sort of kids' idea of being from a young age, and then when they come out of school they are very confused about what's going on. I feel like it would add to more confusion if you don't teach them about these things. Within the UK, we had something called Section 28, and it was incredibly damaging and incredibly harmful for a lot of the education system. And we're very much at risk of going back into that with how our Conservative government is handling things. They are trying to put a ban on they're trying to reverse the ban on conversion therapy, and it's all a bit of a mess.
And when you start talking about, I guess, teaching about like sex ed and let's say gender expression, sexual orientation, I think you do walk a different line between like, bringing up points of history or, even like the sciences. I mean, everything, what you include in a curriculum, whether it's science, factual, even mathematics, like there's some kind of, political basis there, whether it's super political or super apolitical. I mean, there's always going to be interest there. And so I think what's really important is, curriculum transparency with parents. I think parents and students should be involved in the development of that process, so that everyone at least has a say or at least can see what's being talked about at the table.
You really have bounced around everywhere. So I'm curious if you wanted to ask like any specific things.
Part of my issue, I think, with the idea of like having it mandatory at certain ages is that some kids, and this is why I do think parents should have the right to pull their kids out, because I think some parents are, like the really involved parents do know what their kids are ready for and what they aren't. Some kids are not quite ready for those conversations. I think one thing that I heard that was a little concerning to me on the liberal side and kind of kept me here was I did hear someone, I think, say something about parents of other cultures not being willing to, and I've lived in 5 countries. I've lived in 2 Muslim majority countries. I've lived in a Hindu, technically should be secular, but Hindu majority country. And I've lived in a Catholic country. And I think the Western mindset and how we approach issues, and we have to understand, like, when you're coming out of the country and you're bringing your children into a new culture as an immigrant, you want to keep your values at home, right? And there's things that you're going to be concerned about and nervous about, partially because of like religious affiliation maybe, or just not experiencing it. And so if schools want those conversations to happen, the focus needs to not be going directly to the children, but it needs to be going to the parents.
So when it comes to the argument of religion, I mean, I completely understand, like, as much as I disagree with it, as someone that's very much the atheist, I was brought up as a Christian, I'm very much an atheist now. Some religions really do have strong views on queer people, on gay people. However, again, it goes back to what I was saying about how parents should be able to, if they're having that choice, they should be able to take their kids away from learning about religion, especially if they're atheists in their household. You can still sort of instill those things at home, and in some religions as well, I should state, the concept of a third gender or transgender or non-binary has been a big thing, especially, it might be a lot older religions that aren't necessarily around today, but some religions do stem from the idea of their gods or goddesses being a like third gender, and they were held in like the highest hierarchy of like societal expectations. They were literally gods. People of a third gender were literally seen as gods. Now it seems to have completely regressed into not at all, and that people that are trans or non-binary are literally like a bit of rubbish on your shoe at the end of the day. So I agree somewhat with what these undecided panel have to say. So that seems to be the end of that prompt. It seems like a lot of a shorter one, but it was very interesting to see this new format, and I'm very glad that it was a very calm and not heated debate, unlike a lot of the other videos. As moderator, thank you again for doing such an amazing job. For the prompt itself of should schools include trans conversations in sex ed? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd be more than happy to get into a very interesting debate about it. However, if you do want to debate and you do want to talk about these things, A, make sure you're respectful, and B, it's a learning place for everyone, including myself. I'm never going to claim that I know everything. I'm never going to claim I'm an expert, nor that my opinions should be held higher than other people's. So if you want to have a conversation about it, please be respectful and don't resort to any sort of violence, or don't resort to just insulting people off the cuff. I will, if I start responding to your comments and we start having a dialogue, I'm going to question why you think those ways, not to be disrespectful, but to find out whether you truly think that, or maybe, like a lot of conservatives like to call us liberals, maybe you might be just following some sort of media fear-mongering. So please keep that in mind. But for now, that has been the video. Do let me know what you think of it. If you enjoy this sort of content, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I will be uploading a lot more frequently, and I hope you enjoy. If you do have any Jubilee videos or any sort of trans-related videos, any sort of non-binary related things you want me to react to, please do let me know. And for now, I've been your humble captain, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Goodbye.